Leadership decision fatigue. Have you heard of it? Have you experienced it? I think that maybe it's not a terminology that we hear so often, but most certainly we've all experienced it. In fact, I believe most of us experience it in these days quite often, and that's why it makes sense to recognize it before we burn out, because this one is not a personal defect. It's actually linked to a leadership culture and how we navigate and narrate the constant changes and pressures our organizations are put up against by the external environment, and how all that impacts each of us personally. Hi there, my name is Susanna Rantanen, a fellow business leader, decision maker, and a decision fatigue sufferer. In this episode of the Story Driven Business Podcast, we're talking about the hidden load leaders carry when culture and strategy fall out of alignment, and how you can recognize the early warning signs before burnout, disengagement, or quiet organizational drag are taking hold. There is this moment most leaders recognize but rarely name. You're still capable, you still care, the strategy still makes sense, but your leadership feels heavier than it should. Decision making drain you faster. Small issues take up much more energy than they used to. You feel friction in meetings, in execution, in people, but you can't always explain why. This isn't just workload. This is weight. And in most organizations, that weight doesn't come from strategy. It comes from your leadership culture not carrying the strategy anymore. On paper, strategy is clean. Markets, priorities, targets, transformation roadmaps. But in real life, it doesn't move on paper. It moves through people. And when culture doesn't support that movement, leadership becomes physically and mentally heavier. It's not because the strategy is wrong. It's because leaders start compensating for those cultural gaps. You start explaining more than you used to. You start repeating decisions, managing emotions of people instead of momentum, carrying unspoken resistance, absorbing uncertainty from your teams. This is what I like to call culture gravity. When culture doesn't carry strategy, leaders carry it instead. And that's when leaders start to feel their work heavier than it should. Decision fatigue isn't just about volume. I think it's about friction more than anything. If every decision that you and I make requires extra explanation, extra emotional reassurance, extra political navigation, extra resistance management, extra re-justifying the why, then each of the decisions that we make costs more of our energy than it should. And I don't believe that this is a personal capacity problem. I think this is a cultural alignment problem. Healthy culture makes decisions lighter because people understand context. And when I say healthy culture, I don't mean it as opposite of toxic culture. Healthy, or maybe the right culture that matches the strategy is the better way to put it. So let's start again. So a culture that matches your strategic intent makes decisions lighter because people understand the context. They trust that direction. They understand it. It makes sense. It makes them feel safe to go ahead and execute it. They don't need constant convincing because they understand, because it feels like a comfortable system where the way I do work is enough for me to be rewarded, to be appreciated, to feel that meaning of my work. And when this decision fatigue spikes, it's often because culture doesn't absorb the uncertainty anymore. So then what happens is that you as the leader have to start absorbing uncertainty. And that is very quiet. but very dangerous shift. Most experienced leaders are trained to tolerate friction because they've seen it happening many times. Maybe they've been professionally coached and trained to tolerate it too. But some friction is actually a signal, not a cost of doing business. And I found the most common signals of friction that you will notice slowly and quietly, but eventually, when your culture is no longer carrying your business strategy. So, for example, meetings where alignment is reached, but the actual action stalls. Everybody agrees with it, but after the meeting, nothing happens. Things don't move forward. Teams are asking for more clarity on things that you thought that were already clear. Passive resistance is disguised as many questions. Why? Leaders have to resell that same strategy to the same people over and over again. And there's this emotional heaviness in conversations that used to be a feeling of energy. Now, this is, in my opinion and in my experience, where leadership gets sneaky hard because nothing is really broken, but everything just feels so much heavier. And when you're being put into that situation, sort of in a growing pace, it really drains you out. It's kind of like your culture is leaking energy instead of multiplying it. And then you and your peer leaders become these shock absorbers. I have suffered from leadership burnout, or maybe more like an entrepreneurship burnout, a couple of times during my entrepreneur career of over 15 years. And I used to ignore it because I didn't really understand the telltale signs until I was too deep in it. Now I do notice the signals, I notice the signs, and I know when to press break and do something about it. So I want to share the early signs of leadership burnout that I feel that most leaders ignore. I did too. So these are what usually show up before you burn out, before people start to disengage, and before you truly start experiencing that leadership exhaustion. So first, you are the one who is carrying the emotional temperature of the room. You are regulating people's mood, not just their performance. Number two is that you feel responsible for whether the people believe in the plans and the strategic direction, not just their results. So you're selling the future internally more than you're building it together. Number three, you over prepare for alignment because trust is shared. And this happens when trust in shared understanding starts to weaken. So we're no longer on the same page. And then four, you feel lonely in this responsibility. It's not because those people aren't there, but it's because they're not fully with you. You start to doubt whether you can trust their commitment and trust their loyalty to you as their leader and to your organization as their workplace. And these are the signals, the very early signals that the culture is no longer holding the weight it used to. The danger is that strong leaders normalize this as this is just part of leadership, but it's not. It is a structural issue, not a personal one, and you need to put it a stop before it gets too far. Let's talk about when the culture stops carrying your strategy. So this is where story-driven leadership becomes really practical, not fluffy. Your company culture carries strategy when people understand that bigger picture, the bigger narrative. They actually see themselves in the future that is being built. So when you narrate the vision, the mission, what is their role in that journey, and they understand it, they feel like they belong, that they have a meaningful role in your business's journey, that is when your culture is carrying that strategy. They also feel emotionally safe to commit, make mistakes, ask questions, but get answers. And they trust your leadership intent. They feel that meaning, not just pressure. Now, this does not happen through PowerPoints and Teams meetings or Google meetings or memos or whatnot. This happens through narrated leadership. When you actually focus as a leader to a systematic narrative about the future that you are building together. So when you as a leader share context, not just conclusions, speak about uncertainties and fears, not just confidence, invite people into this why, not just the what, and let people see the journey, not just the destination. This is when your culture becomes a load-bearing structure again. Your leadership feels so much lighter, not necessarily easier. Being a leader is never easy, but it doesn't have to be so heavy. It can be lighter. It can be energizing, fulfilling, meaningful for you as well. If your leadership feels heavier than it used to, I don't want you to ask what's wrong with you. Ask rather, where is that culture that used to absorb strategy? What happened to our our leadership culture? Where am I compensating emotionally or cognitively? And where do people need the narrative instead of just direction? And am I doing this? Do I know how to do this? Because weight is information, heaviness is feedback. So take it, reflect on it, taste it, eat it, chew it, talk about it. Get that feedback to get rid of your leadership heaviness. I think it's very important to really listen to it early. So I don't think that leadership was meant to be weightlifting. Of course, it builds strength and requires strength. But I think that it also requires structure that carries some of that weight for you. And when your leadership culture carries your strategy, your leadership feels, of course, demanding still, because you are responsible for so much, but it's not supposed to drain you. And when that leadership culture doesn't carry the strategy, even the greatest leaders start to feel tired in ways that taking a nap or resting days just won't fix it. So the real question isn't how strong are you as a leader? It's more like how much is your leadership culture carrying the weight for you? Now, I want to know, what are your thoughts on leadership decision fatigue? Can you recognize it around you? Have you suffered from it? And if you have, how have you been coping with it? If you have any tips or thoughts about this topic, please comment below or tag me in a LinkedIn conversation. I'd really like to know. Thank you for listening to the Story Driven Business podcast. My name is Susanna Rampanen, and I'll see you again next week.